Okay. Good afternoon, Avian Science class. I see some of you have figured out how to do your drawing and coloring on the front page. I hope you enjoyed doing that. Unfortunately, it's time to start lecture and I have to erase all of this in order to move on. All right. Announcements, pretty much the same old at this point. So the assignments have been posted on Blackboard. The quiz and the short answer questions are there. And both are due Sunday, January 30th before midnight. So last time we defined a bird and we talked about all of these terms like endothermic and tetrapod that are used to describe what a bird is. We're going to talk briefly about how birds are organized or classified, and then we're going to start discussion of anatomy. And we're going to do the external anatomy, and then we're going to do a lecture on, let me think, canaries and finches, and then we'll move on to internal anatomy. So we're going to do some, the external anatomy is going to have a lot of words that weren't familiar to you, but then we're going to do something a little easier before we go on to internal anatomy, which again is going to have some terms that might not be familiar. All right. So this is the bird family tree. So the way these work is over here on, over here on the right side, we have a bunch of different groups of birds. Birds are organized based on both physical characteristics that are distinct to that group, as well as genetic similarity. When we talk about birds, there are around 10,000 species that we've recognized and described. And they're divided into between 20 and 40 groups. We are not going to talk about all of the different groups. We're going to focus in on the most common groups and the groups that you're most likely to be interacting with. So the way this family tree works is whenever you see lines coming back and intersecting at a point like this, that indicates a last common ancestor between these two groups. So vultures, hawks, and eagles had a last common ancestor right here. If we want to talk about their relationship with owls, we go further to the left before we find a common ancestor. Again, every time we see one of these intersections, that's a common ancestor. So we know that owls and kingfishers are less related to vultures and hawks than they are to each other because they have a common ancestor much closer to them. And they're more closely related, owls are more closely related to vultures than they are to, say, passerine birds, because you'd have to go back and count more nodes in between there. So 1 node, 2 node, 3, 4, 5. So there's been a lot more evolution and changes to separate passerine birds and vultures. This particular image is also set up based on evolutionary time periods. So the ratites, this group of birds, hasn't really changed much since a common ancestor with all other kinds of birds. So that's one of the oldest groups of birds. Chickens and waterfowl are also a pretty old group because they're not too far, not too many nodes between them and the last common ancestor of all birds. Is this making sense to people? Maybe. It can be a little bit tricky to understand this if you haven't seen these before, but I'm getting a lot of yes, we understands in the chat, so that's good. So we're going to start with one of the oldest groups, the ratites. Ratites are large birds. They are flightless. They have simple feathers. I'm going to close this window so you can see me a little bigger. This is an emu feather. You can see it's got 2 long strands. It's kind of loosely textured. It's not highly organized. It's very soft. It's different than what we think of as a typical bird feather. All right, back to the PowerPoint. We also see this group has relatively long, very muscular legs. They walk, they run, they don't fly, so they have to have a lot of strength in those legs. This is a cassowary. Let me add my text here. This group also includes emu and ostrich. And as a general rule, these are birds that you do not want to mess with. They are powerful, and while given the chance, they would run away from a person. If you corner them, they will kick you. Ostriches have been known to kill lions. So it's a very, very powerful kick. And if you're thinking about your project, the Australian emu wars is an interesting topic to think about. All right. The next group, galliform, is the fancy word for it. Galliforms are chickens, turkey, oh, comments in the question. Is there a reason that they can kick really hard? Yeah, it's to defend themselves against predators. They can't fly away, so they have to have a defense. Are they as fast as an ostrich? Ostriches are going to be the fastest of the ratites, probably the fastest bird when it comes to running.
Professor,
Yes.
what is that group called? The ostrich, emu, and cassowary?
Those are called ratites.
Ratites. Okay, I'm trying to get that.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. The galliforms, the chicken-like birds. Oh, we're going back to the ratites again. Do they try and snap you? Oh yeah, they'll try and bite you. Yeah. They'll peck, absolutely, and they can hurt, even though they don't have teeth. When we talk about beaks and bills, we'll talk about the way the shape of the bill determines, well, in this example, how much damage they could do if they bit you. And some birds, not so much. Some birds, yes, it's like they're trying to gum you to death. But if you've got a bird like with a duck-like bill that doesn't have a sharp end to it, they can cause bruising and blisters. They can't break the skin, but they can make it hurt. And I have not been bitten by a ratite, but I suspect it's a similar situation. They could give you a really nasty bruise. Any other ratite questions before we go on to the chicken-like birds? Okay. Ratites are kind of my favorite group of birds. They're just, I think I've mentioned this, they're really stupid, but they're very, very interesting. All right, the galliforms or chicken-like birds. These are the chickens, the turkeys, the pheasants, the peafowl. Peafowl is a general word. Peacock refers just to the males. And guinea fowl. A lot of these have been domesticated. So we have domestic chickens and turkeys, pheasants, peacocks have been domesticated, guinea fowl have been domesticated. This group has been a very popular group for us to domesticate. They are all heavy-bodied, ground-feeding birds. So they can fly, but they're usually poor flyers. So turkeys, wild turkeys in New England can certainly fly up into the trees to avoid predators or to sleep at night, but you don't usually see them flying overhead. They don't tend to fly long distances. And that's generally true for this group. This is a pheasant. Lady somebody's pheasant. I'm sorry, I forget the name of that one. This is a jungle fowl. The jungle fowl are the wild ancestors of chickens. So chickens that are domestic look an awful lot like wild chickens. And if you're in an area that has both, they breed with each other a lot. And it's very hard to tell the difference between a wild chicken or jungle fowl and a domestic one. The waterfowl group, closely related to chickens. Again, we are looking at relatively heavy bodies. but they also are highly adapted to water. These are the ducks, the geese, the swans. They have webbed feet. And they generally like to be near or on water, often feeding in water. These guys are better flyers than the chicken group. You can see swans flying overhead. They do migrate long distances. And of course, ducks and geese, we all know those migrate. These guys are usually, well, no, I'm not going to say that because that's not quite accurate. All right. Ducks, geese, and swans will try and bite you. But the other thing they will do is smack you with their wings. So they hiss, they're kind of scary. A lot of people are scared of these guys. And with reason. A goose isn't going to kill you. A swan can break your arm by smacking you with their wing. It's not very common, but they can do that. And there is at least, I hesitate to say this, one confirmed death by swan. One person who was canoeing and a swan attacked him, knocked him out of the boat, and basically just prevented him from being able to come up for air, and he drowned. So yeah, don't go canoeing near swans. Our next group is the dove group. These are primarily vegetarian. They eat plants and seeds and fruit. They tend to have a stout body, short neck, and a slender bill. So they're a little chunky looking. They don't have a long neck here, and they've got this relatively long, slender bill. When we think of doves and pigeons, you tend to think of things like mourning doves and city pigeons. But there are a lot of other doves in the world, and some of them are absolutely spectacular. So if you want to look at spectacular pictures of birds, Google fruit doves. This guy is an example of a fruit dove, and he's just, I mean, that's just a gorgeous animal. Doves tend to be a little skittish or shy, except for the pigeons that you see in urban areas. And so they can be hard to spot in the wild, and they tend to move away from people. They're also generally crappy at building nests. The way they survive is by having lots and lots of eggs. Okay, hummingbirds and swifts. So these two groups of birds are closely related to each other, and they generally have small feet, and they're not great at perching. They have really evolved for life on the wing. So this, of course, is a hummingbird. And if you've watched hummingbirds in your yard during the summer, they do perch, but they're amazingly maneuverable. They can fly around forwards and backwards. It's just amazing to watch these guys fly. Swifts are the same thing. In New England, there are chimney swifts. You often see those, again, during the summer. Both of these groups feed while flying. So we see hummingbirds feeding from flowers. They also eat insects, as do swifts, and they all catch insects while in flight. Cranes, the only thing I want to mention is that there are long-legged, long-necked birds that are not herons. So this is not in the same group as great blue herons. That's really all I want you to know about cranes. The herons and egrets, these are what we typically think about when we think about long-legged, long-necked birds. Long legs, generally wading birds. They walk through the water to feed. They tend to breed in groups called rookeries. Rookery is an area where a lot of birds, totally missed what I was saying about cranes. I'm going to go back to that in a second, Erin. Rookery is an area where a lot of birds they can be same or similar species nest at the same time. So great blue herons, great egrets, and their relatives will nest in trees near or in standing in water. And there can be hundreds of nests in one area. And they all nest at the same time. And that is a rookery. They kind of do that for defense. If you've got a lot of birds in an area, if a predator comes in and starts to eat chicks, well, they're not going to go through the whole rookery. They're going to fill up first. And they're really going to eat, they're really going to go after the nests on the edges of the rookery. So the most dominant individuals will nest in the center, where their nests are protected. And the least dominant ones nest around the outside, where they're more likely to be predated. And what I mentioned about cranes is this kind of looks like a heron, right? Long legs, wading in the water, long neck. They have a very, very different lifestyle. And evolutionarily, they're not in the same group as the herons and egrets. And that's all you need to know about the cranes at this point. Okay. Gulls. So I'm sure you can't tell from this picture, but this is me in the blue bike helmet. I was helping out with some research on birds that breed on an island off the coast of Maine called Appledore Island. Why am I wearing a bicycle helmet? Any ideas? Poop? No. Land on your head? Close. Swooping. There we go. Yes. The gulls learn to recognize the people who are doing gull research, who are capturing gulls, measuring them, banding them, and they will come after you and they can cut your scalp open with their beaks. They will really do some damage. So they're pretty aggressive when they're nesting. So the first thing to say is seagull is not a scientific term. We just call them gulls. And there are lots and lots of different species of gull. They are nest on the ground in colonies, often on islands. Generally, they are long-lived birds. They live for more than 10 years, depending on the species. They are very resourceful. They're very clever and curious. So they're pretty intelligent birds. I mentioned that they would learn to recognize the gull researchers. Appledore Island also has researchers who are studying marine species or songbirds or various other types of biology. Those people can walk around the island without bike helmets. But if you measure the birds and are handling gulls, you cannot walk around the island safely without a bike helmet on. They will come at you, they will hit you in the head, and they will poop on you. Appledore Island doesn't have a fresh water supply, so showers are limited, but the gull researchers tended to get more showers because we tended to get pooped on. And nobody wanted to be near that smell. Again, these have webbed feet and they live near or on the water. It looks like somebody's taking pictures of the screen. That's very clever, very clever. All right, vultures. These are, we have a couple of species. Oh, somebody else said they do screenshots. Same concept? Good idea. We have a couple of species of vulture in the US. Mostly what you see in New England are turkey vultures. There's also a black vulture. These are scavengers, and they are primarily carnivores. They eat a lot of carrion, also known as animal carcasses or dead animals. They usually have a bald head. Why do you think they have bald heads? Think about what they eat. No guesses? Well, to keep themselves clean. Exactly. Exactly. They will stick their whole head and neck in a carcass and they'll get, you know, all kinds of nasty stuff like blood on their head and neck. And it's not easy for them to clean their head and neck. So they don't have feathers. So their feathers don't trap all of that stuff and, you know, start to stink and all that jazz. Vultures are relatively physically weak animals. They don't have strong feet. They don't have a strong bite. Their primary defense against predators is projectile vomiting. And oh my God, is it disgusting. I have handled vultures before I had one vomit on me one time, and it was one of the worst things I have ever smelled. It is truly disgusting. So I can understand why predators would let them go if they do that. And you can kind of get a scale of the size here. This is my husband trying to get one to perch on his finger, just kind of as a joke. Okay, now we're getting into more. Is it true that vultures can digest bone? Yes. Vultures can digest just about anything. They can digest bone. They can eat animals that have been dead and have a lot of bacteria in them because their digestive system is much better at killing bacteria than, say, ours is. They really are impressive birds, even if they're kind of gross. All right. Hawks and eagles. These are day active predators. They have sharp, strong talons. They can do a hell of a lot of damage to a person with their feet or with their beak. And they have a hook at the end of their beak. This is an eagle. Eagles are, of course, the largest of the group. Hawks are smaller, but even small hawks can do some pretty serious damage to you. Generally, the first line of defense is going to be to grab you with their feet. They grab prey items with their feet, so grabbing with their feet is kind of their go-to thing. You can see how long those talons are. They could potentially go right through your hand and come out the other side. Yeah, hawks are pretty easy to spot, especially the most common ones, like red-tailed hawks. Yeah, you do need to be nervous about small dogs, and hawks and eagles. They will also take cats. So if you let your cat outside, they will take them. It is something to be cautious of. I have seen vests for small dogs that have little spikes on the back to try and prevent predation by a hawk or an eagle. Bunnies, yes, if your bunnies are outside, they certainly are at risk. Now we can also talk about the nocturnal predators, the owls. Yeah, golden eagles are much bigger than the bald eagles. They're just massive birds. Okay, so owls, again, sharp, strong talons, but now we have excellent night vision and hearing. So when we start talking about internal anatomy, we'll talk about bird vision. They can actually see things that we can't. Owls in particular can see, believe it or not, the urine trail of mice. So mice, they just kind of pee while they're running along. and owls can see that and follow it to track down something to eat. Generally speaking, these guys also have a stocky body, and they come in a lot of different sizes. This is a great horned owl. That is the most common very large owl in the US. This guy is a flammulated owl, and this is kind of the small end of size for owls. There's a lot of neat stuff about owls. Have I said that about every category so far? There's a lot of neat stuff about birds. Okay, now falcons, a lot of people would put these in the same group as hawks. Falcons are not hawks, but they are similar. What is different about them? They are excellent fast flyers. These guys are amazing flyers. They're characterized by thin, tapered wings. So the wing is kind of a thin triangle coming out from the body. The wing shape is really important for their ability to fly. You probably have heard that peregrine falcons are the fastest land animal, period. And when they are diving at prey, they can go up to 200 miles per hour. Possibly more. It's hard to measure their speed in a full dive. Now, unlike owls, unlike hawks, they may grab prey with their feet, but they kill it with their beak. So they use their beak more than hawks do. They also have excellent vision. They have to have excellent vision because they often catch prey while they are flying, or they are way high up in the atmosphere diving down to something on the ground. So this kestrel, this is a kestrel. A kestrel can spot a cricket from the top of a 2 or 3 story building. Cricket on the ground. Wow is right. I certainly wouldn't be able to spot a cricket. They can spot crickets, and they're big insect eaters. Now we're getting to some of the things that we tend to see more of in the pet trade, the parrots. This group includes what we call parrots, what we call parakeets, which would more accurately be budgers, or budgies. But also true parakeets, conures, cockatiels, cockatoos, and macaws. So these are very, very intelligent animals and very, very social. They have strong, flexible feet. So it's not just raw strength, but they can use their feet to manipulate objects, to move things around. When perching, they have an upright stance, so they tend to sit upright, and they are usually found in tropical areas. I see somebody says their dad wants an African gray. Well, I hope you hold off till we talk about parrots and watch the Parrots Confidential video. We will see over and over and over this semester that having a bird as a pet is very different from having a dog or a cat. And you need a lot of different knowledge before you go into owning a bird. It's one of the things I'm really hoping that you guys get out of this semester, a good understanding of birds that will help you decide if you want a bird, and if so, what kind of bird, or to help you talk to other people about whether they really want a bird. Because a lot of birds they're noisy, they're messy, they're very, very challenging compared to dogs or cats, especially the parrots and the cockatoos and the macaws, the big birds. And the vast majority of these big birds, the parrots, the cockatoos, and the macaws, don't stay in one household their entire life because people decide they can't keep them. They think they want one, and then they learn more about them and they decide they really can't handle it. But like I said, we'll get to that when we talk about parrots. Yeah, they live long. So depending on the species, the big parrots can live between 50 and 120 years. Macaws live near or over 100 years if they're well cared for. Yep. That is crazy. That is definitely a multi-generational commitment. Especially with the macaws. You're not just passing them on to your children, you're passing them on to your grandchildren. The oldest one you've met was 26. Yeah. They're lucky if they're still living in a household at 26. A lot of them end up in rescues before then. And rescues, parrot rescues tend to fill up, and basically that's all they do. They just end up being a sanctuary situation. I'm sorry, I'm giving you guys a sneak preview of the depressing part of the semester. Didn't mean to do that today. All right, passerines, also called perching birds or songbirds. About 60% of all bird species are in this group. Generally speaking, these are small. There's a lot of diversity in this group. And when we talk about pets, we're talking about finches and canaries, and similar types of birds. When we talk about wild ones, this group also includes the crows. So lots of birds in this category, lots of diversity here. I find finches and canaries do pretty well in home environments. Budgies do pretty well in home environments. Generally, as a rule of thumb for birds, smaller tends to do better in a household. Okay, any questions on the categorization of birds? Nope. Oh, Mary, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Hi, are we gonna have to know all of these?
Yes. Yes, you are.
Okay,
But remember, all of your assignments are open note. So if you take good notes, you can have those right there while you're taking quizzes and answering short answer questions.
Could I see the last slide and the first slide again?
This one?
No, the one that you had it on, the passer in these, those ones, but with the notes. Do you have them?
You'll have to get those off the video.
I can
I
look
have-
at the video.
Yeah, so this is being recorded and it'll be up on YouTube. So if you miss something, you can go back and watch the video and find those notes again. Unfortunately, for me to go to the next slide, I have to erase all of the stuff that I write on the screen. And when I erase it, it's gone unless you look at the video. Okay, but that does tell me I need to slow down a little bit. So I'll try and slow down a little bit. This is the problem with Zoom. I tend to pick up speed more on Zoom than when I'm in a classroom. Remind me to slow down. Okay. The next part is the external anatomy of the bird. There are a lot of terms here. So let's, yes, absolutely. Guys, get a screenshot of this one. This is the major parts of the bird on the outside. Now, you might be going, oh my God, look at all those words. All right, some of these you already know, right? You guys know what a tail is. I hope you do. You're animal science majors. You guys know what a wing is, a belly, a chest, a side, a throat. So a lot of these terms are going to be very, very familiar. So let's look at the terms that are less familiar. Upper tail and undertail coverts. These are specific groups of feathers. So here is Sassy. The feathers right here that cover the base of her tail, those are the overtail coverts. And on the underside, you can see these feathers right through here. Again, they're just covering the base of the tail feathers. These are the undertail coverts. And back to screen share. All right. Mantle refers kind of to the upper back. Nape is the nape of the neck, just like where you scruff a cat or a dog. We call that a nape. Oh, here's another big word. It's probably not familiar. And for some reason, let me see if I can. There we go. Supercilium. The supercilium is the area from the back of the head over the eye to the base of the beak. So this whole section here is the supercilium. For our purposes, this is not a term that you're going to use a lot unless you become a bird watcher. And bird watchers, when they talk about a mark on a wild bird used to identify it, they'll use a term like supercilium. So here's a hint. I'm not going to ask you that on the quiz. Crown, top of the head, where the crown would rest. Forehead, that one's pretty obvious. Here's another new word, lores. This is the skin between the beak and the eye. The space between the beak and the eye. Whoops. Wrong drawing tool.
Professor,
Yes.
I had a question. So, you mentioned in the beginning of class that the homework assignment and the quiz is already in Blackboard.
Yep.
So, with the homework assignment and the quiz, where do I find it in Blackboard?
Oh, okay. That's a good question. They, over to the left hand side of Blackboard, there is a, I'm calling them modules, and it'll say week 2, probably January 25 and 27, but it'll have this week's dates. If you click on that, it'll bring up a couple of different pages, including a terminology page. So if you want to look at the terminology for a lecture before we do the lecture, or if you want to print it out, you can do that. And there's also a folder in there that says assignments, and that's where the quiz and the short answer stuff will be.
So both homework and the quiz will be under assignments?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome. Okay. More words that we're not familiar with. Auriculars refers to the ear region. So if you think of audible or audiology or any words like that that start with AU, you can remember that auricular refers to ear. Malar, this is sometimes called the mustache region. And I'm going to tell you again, those are not words that you need to memorize. Well, you don't need to memorize any of these because it's all open note. You don't have to worry about those. I'm not going to test you on those two. Throat, I hope you can find a throat, a side, a chest, and a belly. Flank probably is a term you've heard before. I hear it a lot with referring to horses, and it's basically the hip region. Okay. Now, don't freak out about this image. It's another image. This is a headshot. The terms that are on here, don't worry about those. We're just looking closer at the head of a bird. So again, we have a throat. There is a malar stripe. Remember, we talked about the malar region. That is a malar, a malar stripe. There's another one here. This one is also in the malar region. We have the beak with the lower and upper part, the lores again. This bird has an eye ring. It's got a stripe on the top of the head, and in fact, it's got a bunch of stripes up here. It has this line here, which is called an eye line. We use these terms when we are trying to identify wild birds. So if we look here at this guy, this is a song sparrow. You can see a malar stripe right here. You can see yellow in the region of the lores right here. You can see an eye line. You can see a bunch of stripes on the head. The lower mandible is kind of pink and the upper one's kind of gray. These are all things you can use to identify birds in the wild. And this is just another picture of one. This is a white-throated sparrow. Again, you can see the lores are kind of yellow right here. All right. These two terms you do need to know. The nares are the nose openings. So this is where birds breathe. Just like we have nostrils, birds have what we call nares. And the cere or ceres is bare skin around the nares. Not all birds are going to have bare skin here, but a lot of them do. And when we get to the next slide, we're going to learn why I'm asking you to know what a cere is. It's not unusual for this to be colored. So you can see in this bird, it's very bright yellow. That can be used for a visual way of communicating your species, for example. But when we're talking about pet birds and we're talking about budgies, the ceres will tell you what sex the bird is. It's not always easy to sex birds. If you've got a cockatoo, unless it lays eggs, you probably are never going to know for sure what their sex is. But budgies, you can tell. If the cere is tan or pink, it's female. If the cere is blue, it's a male. How many males do you see here? I've got the chat window closed. There we go. 3, 3, 3, 3. Yes, good. The only female, well, we can't tell about this one, is this one right here, who has pink. Now, some colors of budgies, the ceres don't reflect this accurately. So some of the white strains in particular, the ceres color won't be quite accurate. But for the more typical, boldly colored individuals, the ceres will tell you that. The other thing I can tell from this image is these are all mature adult birds. And I can tell that because when budgies are born, these stripes on the back of the head here go all the way across the crown and down to the front. And then they kind of recede as the bird ages. So you can't tell once they're an adult how old they are. But if you're in the pet store and you're wanting to buy a budgie, the more stripes on the forehead, the younger they are. Unfortunately, the younger they are, sometimes you can't tell the sex by looking at the seers, but you can tell in the adults. All right, so what if the seer is white? What is the color of the bird with a white seer? Because if it's white, then you can't really tell the sex by looking at the seer. Sometimes in some colors, the seer is very, very pale tan, which would indicate female. Okay, good. So now you can go to the pet store and impress your friends. Whew. I didn't think we'd get quite this far today. That's okay. Feathers. All right. So you'll notice I get a lot of slides from this website, allaboutbirdbiology.org. The Cornell Lab, they have a very, very good public education website. It's primarily focused on wild birds, but it's a really good site if you're interested in wild birds. So when we look at feathers, there are several major kinds of feathers that we tend to see on most birds. We're not talking about raytites here because raytite feathers are different. But most birds, tail and wing feathers are large and organized. Large compared to the size of the bird and the size of the other feathers. In the tail feathers have a straight shaft. So you can see that here on this ruffed grouse tail feather. The shaft goes straight up the center, and the feather is symmetrical. It's exactly the same on the left side of the shaft as it is on the right side of the shaft. On wing feathers, they have a curved shaft, and they are what we call asymmetrical. So you can see the shaft curves, and the side on the left is different than the side on the right. Abigail, I'm going to get back to your question in just a sec. So you'll often see one side is thinner than the other side of the shaft. Okay. What do I mean when I say feathers are organized, or flight feathers, wing feathers and tail feathers are organized? This is not what I would call organized. This is loose, fluffy kind of feather. We get the same thing with my emu feather here. It's kind of loose, fluffy. You can pet it. You're not doing damage to it. This is a tail feather. If I touch it, you'll see that instead of a bunch of loose pieces like this guy, all this loose stuff, I can stick my finger through it and I'm not damaging it. This, I can't really stick my finger through. The pieces of the feather are all stuck together. That's what I mean when I say they're organized. And I've got a video that shows how they're connected. So let's jump ahead to that. Okay. When we look up close at the structure of a feather, here's the shaft, and there are these barbs that branch off from it. And each one of these barbs has smaller barbs called barbules that stick off of that. And they kind of hook together, kind of like Velcro. And why is the video not working? I don't know why the video doesn't want to actually play. If you pull these barbs apart, you're going to get separation between this shaft and this shaft. And you can see right here, a break in the feather structure. I don't really want to break one of my feathers that's not already broken. But this one's broken. So you can see this feather is broken right here. The organization structure has broken and I can't fix it. Birds can, there's a way that birds can fix these breaks, but people generally can't, and once it's broken, you're kind of stuck with it. There may be somebody in a museum somewhere that knows how to do it, but I've never heard that there's a way to do it. Oof. Okay. All right, the other kinds of feathers, we talk about a semi-plume, which is not quite like this guy. This is a downy type feather. It's a big one because it came off of an ostrich. But it's got some organization near the shaft, but then it's also got some loose stuff coming off of the shaft. So it's kind of a cross between an organized feather and a down feather. Contour feathers, the description is similar to semi-plume, except now, instead of being organized near the shaft, they're organized on the outer end toward the far tip of the feather, and then they're loose and fluffy towards the body. The contour feathers are the feathers on the surface of the bird. So they're the feathers that you see here on Sassy's body. This part that's loose is underneath the organized part of the next feather. So the feathers kind of stack on top of each other with that loose fuzzy part close to the body. It's part of the insulation system. And these contour feathers are often over down feathers, especially in waterfowl. And down feathers, those are the ones that are primarily for insulation, for keeping the bird warm. And so when we look at this, the surface of the bird is contour feathers. The flight feathers are on the wing, fancy that. The tail feathers are on the tail, and down is underneath all of these contour feathers. Oh, there goes the video. Huh. Not sure why it wasn't going earlier. Okay. This is a down feather. You can see a shaft. You can see barbs, but they're not connected. The two barbs next to each other are not hooked together in any way, shape. They're just floating next to each other. And this is important to remember. Not all feathers fit neatly into these categories that we've talked about. So this is kind of what you'll often see on a raytite, on an emu or a cassowary. It looks almost fur-like on the bird. So it's pretty different from what you see on most birds. And when we look at those raytite feathers, did you know T-Rex had feathers? Yeah, not very many, just on parts of the body. But when we look at the fossils, the feathers that we see on T-Rex look an awful lot like what we would see on a raytite today. Other birds, other dinosaurs, the theropods, the later ones, their feathers look more like actual modern bird feathers. So you can see those imprints of feathers here in this fossil. Taylor, did you not know that Tyrannosaurus Rex had feathers? Yeah, lots of people don't. I love telling that one. I love telling any class that one because so many people don't know it. All right. Any last minute questions before we wrap it up for the day? Looks like a universe of nope, we're all good. Well, in that case, I will see you guys next time. Bye, everybody.